First contact wasn't a message of peace, a friendly greeting from the stars like we'd all dreamed about. It was a death sentence, delivered from the void without a word of warning. It began not with a bang, but with a sudden, chilling silence. One moment, the sky was our own, filled with the familiar orbits of satellites and the distant twinkle of stars. The next, it was blotted out. They emerged from the darkness between stars, their vessels like shards of obsidian, blades that sliced through the fabric of space itself. They called themselves the hegemony. Their armada, thousands of ships arranged in perfect, terrifying geometric formations, darkened Earth's orbit within hours, casting long, cold shadows over a world that had, until that moment, believed itself to be the sole master of its own destiny. Humanity's long-held question about being alone in the universe was answered with crushing finality. There were no negotiations. No demands for surrender. Just a single, synchronized volley of plasma that descended upon the planet with the cold, surgical precision of a butcher. Military installations across the globe vanished. Beijing, Moscow, New Delhi, Washington, D.C. command centers that had stood as symbols of power for centuries were vaporized in silent flashes of white-hot energy, each one a stark, brilliant tombstone visible from space. Earth's organized, global military response lasted exactly 27 minutes. A frantic, chaotic flurry of scrambled jets, missile launches, and defiant broadcasts that were swatted from the sky like flies. And then, silence. Deep beneath the rolling hills of central Texas, buried under hundreds of feet of steel and concrete, inside the supposedly nuke-proof command center of Fort Hood, all hell broke loose. The ground heaved. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the bunker into absolute darkness, a darkness punctuated only by the horrifying shriek of tortured metal and the explosive roar of a direct hit. The alien plasma, a weapon beyond our comprehension, had cut through the hardened facility as if it were paper. Major Eva Rostova, 32 years old, was thrown across the command deck like a ragdoll. She slammed into a bank of monitors, the impact stealing the air from her lungs. For a moment, there was nothing but a high-pitched ringing in her ears and the disorienting sensation of falling. When she came to, she was pinned beneath a collapsed ceiling support, the taste of blood and concrete dust thick in her mouth. Pain was a distant, secondary concern, adrenaline was a fire in her veins. Her tactical implant, a miracle of military engineering wired directly into her optic nerve, flickered to life against all odds. In the darkness of her vision, a single, stark message scrolled across her retina, its red text a beacon in the chaos. Sentinel protocol activated. Conventional defense grid compromised. Switching to distributed system. It had begun. Not the end, but a new, terrible beginning. The doomsday contingency, the shadow plan that military strategists and paranoid futurists had secretly debated and developed since the first rumors of a crashed saucer in Roswell, was now live. Humanity's official armies, the ones the world saw on parade, were gone. Our governments were decapitated. To the invaders, the war was already over. But Eva knew something the aliens didn't. She wasn't just a major in the United States Army. She was a guardian of a secret far older, far deeper, and infinitely more lethal. A hand, covered in grime, suddenly grabbed her arm. Captain Marcus Sully Sullivan, his face a mask of soot and blood, was pulling her from the wreckage. His voice was a raw shout, barely audible over the ringing in their ears. Major. The central server core survived the initial hit. It's shielded, but it won't last. Their orbital scans will detect the power signature. We've got maybe 15 minutes, max, before their next orbital sweep glasses this entire state. Eva looked at Sully, and in her eyes, he didn't see fear or despair. He saw a cold, burning resolve, a fierceness that seemed to push back against the destruction around them. Get it all, she commanded, her voice calm and steely, cutting through the chaos. Upload everything to the mesh network. Every last byte. Then burn the hardware to slag. We're going dark. As they disappeared into the shattered, smoking depths of the bunker, humanity as the galaxy knew it officially died. And from its ashes, something else, something the universe was not prepared for, was about to be born. In the silent, sterile perfection of high orbit, aboard the hegemony flagship Indomitable Will, Grand Admiral Thorian observed the burning planet below with all four of his eyes narrowed in cold, deep satisfaction. The tactical display, a shimmering holographic sphere that dominated the center of the bridge, painted a picture of flawless victory. Red icons blossomed across the globe, each one marking a neutralized target. The conquest was proceeding exactly as the meticulously crafted simulations had predicted. The hegemony did not engage in wars, they executed purges. And this one was textbook perfect. Thorian was a product of a civilization built on conquest. For 12,000 years, the hegemony had expanded, system by system, species by species. Their philosophy was simple and brutal, strength was the only virtue, and technological superiority was the ultimate expression of that strength. They saw themselves not as conquerors, but as cosmic gardeners, pruning the galaxy of weak, chaotic, and potentially troublesome species before they could fester. The humans, with their primitive projectile weapons and messy, warring nation-states, were a prime example of a weed that needed to be pulled. His executive officer, a slender Zalarian named Lyrics whose species was prized for their computational speed and lack of emotional interference, approached with a fluid, six-limbed gait. Grand Admiral, Lyrics reported, its voice a smooth, clinical monotone. Phase 1 is complete. 97% of identified military command and control targets have been neutralized. The remaining 3% are isolated and without strategic value. The primitives' orbital assets are gone, and their global communication grids are severed. They are blind, deaf, and headless. Thorian's mandibles clicked in a gesture of approval, a dry, sharp sound that echoed slightly in the quiet of the bridge. As expected. Our intelligence was correct. These humans are technologically infantile. Their reliance on centralized command was their critical flaw. Their nuclear arsenals, while quaintly destructive, are useless without the infrastructure to launch them. Their projectile weapons are relics, museum pieces. No match for our plasma cannons and kinetic barriers. He gestured a long, three-fingered hand towards the burning planet. The simulations projected a 99.8% probability of total military collapse within the first hour. We have achieved this in 27 minutes. We are ahead of schedule. He turned his gaze back to Lyrics. Shall we commence civilian pacification protocols? Lyrics' multifaceted eyes shimmered as it processed the request. Standard procedure, as established in the subjugation of the Cygnian Federation and the Kthar Collective, suggests a demonstration of overwhelming force against population centers to ensure a swift and total surrender, minimizing hegemony casualties in subsequent ground operations. Proceed, Thorian commanded, his voice a deep, guttural rumble that conveyed absolute authority. Select their secondary population centers. We have already decapitated their leadership, there is no need to obliterate the primary cities further. We may yet have use for their infrastructure. A casualty count of 10 million, strategically distributed, should be sufficient to break their pathetic, sentimental will. Let them see that resistance is not only futile but will result in the annihilation of everything they hold dear. At once, Grand Admiral, Lyrics replied. But then, it hesitated, a micro-expression of something crossing its usually placid features. A subtle twitch of an antenna. A minor anomaly, sir. Thorian turned one pair of his eyes toward his officer, an unspoken demand for clarification. We're detecting unusual activity in their information networks, Lyrics explained, bringing up a complex data stream on a secondary holodisplay. It appears they are implementing some kind of distributed communication protocol. It's not centralized. It's chaotic, like static, or the chittering of insects. Countless small, low-energy transmissions, bouncing from node to node with no discernible pattern. Our analysts are struggling to even classify it. Thorian observed the swirling, nonsensical data for a moment before dismissing it with a wave of his upper limb. Insects. A fitting analogy. It is irrelevant. The death throes of a dying world. Desperate, meaningless measures from a species that has already lost. They are severed nerves, twitching after the head has been cut off. Do not waste our resources analyzing their panic. Their spirit is already broken, soon, their bodies will follow. Proceed with the bombardment. Yes, Grand Admiral, Lyrics replied, the anomaly filed away and forgotten. As the first pacification beams lanced down from orbit, targeting the sprawling cities of the American heartland Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Thorian allowed himself a moment of private reflection. This was his 17th conquest. Each one followed the same pattern. Strike hard at the head, display overwhelming force, and watch the body go limp. The humans would be no different. They were a species that broadcasted their every thought, their every weakness, into the cosmos. Their television shows, their radio signals, their internet, it was a cacophony of division, fear, and sentimentality. They wore their hearts on their sleeves, and it was this emotional fragility, this primitive irrationality, that made them so easy to predict and so simple to break. He watched as the city of Houston vanished from the tactical map, replaced by a glowing red crater. 10 million casualties would not be a suggestion of defeat. It would be a mathematical certainty. The human equation was a simple one, and he, Grand Admiral Thorian, had already solved it. He was certain of it. That certainty, that unshakable belief in the hegemony's doctrine and his own infallible strategy, was the bedrock of his command. It was also the first, critical crack in his foundation. On the burning planet below, the insects were not dying. They were communicating. And they were beginning to swarm. 3 weeks later, Grand Admiral Thorian's supreme confidence had curdled into a simmering, corrosive rage. The bridge of the indomitable will was no longer a place of calm, assured victory. It was a pressure cooker of frustration and disbelief. The pacification bombardment had gone precisely as planned. 23 human cities across the globe had been reduced to radioactive glass and ash. His ground forces, legions of heavily armed hegemony shock troopers, had established beachheads on every major continent, securing strategic zones around the ruined urban centers. By every metric the hegemony used to measure conquest, victory was not just assured, it was already achieved. And yet, inexplicably, human resistance was intensifying. It wasn't collapsing under the weight of his overwhelming force, it was adapting, evolving, and growing stronger with each passing day. This makes no strategic sense. Thorian growled, his voice echoing in the war room. He slammed a heavy fist onto the central tactical table, causing the holographic displays to flicker and distort. We shattered their command structure. We control the skies, we control their orbits. Their armies are in chaos, leaderless and scattered. How are they coordinating these attacks? How? His assembled officers, a collection of the hegemony's finest military minds from a dozen different conquered species, remained silent. They had no answers. The attacks in question defied every principle of conventional military logic. There were no grand battles, no troop formations to crush, no command posts to obliterate. It was a war fought in the shadows, a ghost war, as some of the younger officers had begun to call it. It started subtly. A supply convoy moving through the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, a route deemed perfectly safe, was suddenly buried under a landslide triggered by precisely placed, remote detonated charges. An entire column of advanced hover tanks, lost without a single shot fired at an enemy. Then, his forward operating bases, massive, fortified compounds, were being hit by swarms of what his analysts could only describe as repurposed civilian drones. They came in waves of hundreds. Some were quadcopters meant for photography, others were fixed-wing craft designed for crop dusting, all of them jury-rigged with improvised explosive devices. They were small, slow, and technologically insignificant. But they were numerous, and they were relentless, overwhelming point defense systems through sheer, attritional numbers. The reports flooding his console were a litany of absurdity. In the swamps of Louisiana, a squad of his elite amphibious troopers were taken out by a group of fishermen in airboats, using high-powered hunting rifles with custom-loaded armor-piercing rounds. Hegemony communication relays, operating on encrypted, multi-spectrum frequencies, were being jammed by techniques that shouldn't have been within human technological capability. The jamming signals weren't sophisticated, they were brutally effective, a cacophony of noise broadcast from thousands of hidden transmitters, turning the very air into a wall of static. Let's zoom in, to the dusty plains of West Texas, not far from the ruins of what was once Lubbock. An alien patrol, 10 feet tall in their gleaming power armor, moves cautiously down a deserted farm road. They are invincible, protected by personal energy shields and armed with plasma repeaters. From a mile away, hidden in a dusty barn, a man named Jeb, a 60-year-old rancher who had never traveled more than 100 miles from his home, watches them on a beat-up laptop. The video feed is grainy, coming from a camera taped to a retrofitted crop duster drone he controls with a joystick. He sips his lukewarm coffee, chews on a piece of straw, and with the practiced ease of a man who has been herding cattle his whole life, he guides the drone, laden with 50 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer and fuel oil, into a steep dive. The explosion isn't massive, but it's perfectly placed, taking out the patrol leader and shredding the shields of the others. Before the survivors can even locate the source of the attack, Jeb has already landed the drone behind his barn and is walking back to his house for breakfast, his laptop under his arm. Meanwhile, in a cramped dorm room at the University of Texas at Austin, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and energy drink cans, a group of computer science students are engaged in their own form of warfare. They aren't soldiers, they're kids who, a month ago, were more concerned with final exams than galactic invasion. Now, they are the bane of the hegemony's local comms officer. They laugh as they execute a piece of code they wrote last night. It doesn't break the aliens' encryption, that's impossible. Instead, it spoofs the handshake protocol of their own maintenance bots, flooding the local hegemony network with millions of nonsensical diagnostic requests. The system doesn't crash, but it slows to an absolute crawl, a digital traffic jam that renders it useless for several critical hours, long enough for a resistance cell downtown to relocate a cache of weapons without being detected by orbital sensors. Most disturbing of all was the psychological component. Humanity wasn't following the expected pattern. Fear was supposed to lead to despair, and despair to surrender. But for these humans, fear seemed to be metabolizing into something else, rage, ingenuity, and a terrifying sense of unity. Every hegemony tactic seemed effective only once. The first time they used thermal imaging to spot ground troops, the resistance fighters learned to mask their heat signatures with insulated mud packs, a primitive technique learned from old action movies. The first time they deployed sonic crowd control weapons, the humans quickly figured out the resonant frequency and broadcasted a counter-frequency from their own car stereos, rendering the advanced technology useless. They were a planetary-scale immune system, identifying each new threat and immediately developing antibodies. They were learning, adapting, and sharing that knowledge through their chaotic, decentralized, insect network, faster than Thorian's rigid, top-down command structure could possibly react. Thorian stood before the main tactical display, watching a live feed from a ground unit pinned down in what was once a Chicago suburb. The human fighters were ghosts. They'd pop out from a sewer grate, fire a rocket-propelled grenade at the weak spot on a walker's leg joint, a weak spot they couldn't possibly have known about a week ago, and vanish back into the rubble before his troops could return fire. "We destroyed their command structure," Thorian muttered to himself, the words tasting like ash. "Their militaries are in chaos. How? How are they fighting a coordinated war with no one in command?" His chief intelligence officer, a keen-eyed Sartorian known for his analytical prowess, finally spoke, his voice strained. "Grand Admiral, the data suggests. They are not fighting a coordinated war. They are fighting a collaborative one. There appears to be no central command. Instead, every human cell, every individual, seems to be acting as their own command, intelligence, and operations unit simultaneously. They share information freely, instantly. A farmer in Texas discovers a vulnerability, and within an hour, a factory worker in Germany is exploiting it. It's like fighting a billion-headed hydra. The concept was alien to Thorian. The hegemony was a pyramid, its strength was in its structure, its clear chain of command. The humans were a fog. A swarm. A ghost that could be everywhere and nowhere at once. His frustration was reaching a breaking point. He needed a handle, something to grab onto, a mind to break. "We've captured one of their resistance leaders," his intelligence officer reported, a flicker of hope in his voice. The transmission intercepts identify her as Major. She was captured near the epicenter of the initial strike in the Texas region, a hotbed of this new, adaptive resistance. She may be the key. You may want to interrogate this one personally, Grand Admiral. Thorian's 4 eyes narrowed. A leader. A head for this hydra. Finally. "Bring her to me," he commanded. "Bring her to the flagship. It is time I got some answers from these irrational primitives myself." He would break her, and in doing so, he would break the back of this infuriating, impossible ghost war. The air on the bridge of the Indomitable Will was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the dust and fire Major Eva Rostova had been breathing for the last 3 weeks. She stood in the center of the vast chamber, the metallic floor cool beneath her worn combat boots. She was bruised, her uniform was torn and stained with dried blood, but as she faced the towering form of Grand Admiral Thorian, her posture was ramrod straight, her chin held high. Her hands were bound by shimmering energy cuffs, but she carried herself not as a prisoner, but as a soldier on enemy soil. Thorian loomed over her, his sheer size and alien physiology designed to intimidate. His 4 eyes, burning with a cold, analytical light, scanned her from head to toe. "Your species continues to resist, despite the utter futility," he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the deck plates. "You have witnessed our power. You have seen your cities burn, your armies broken. Yet you persist in this. This irrationality. Explain it to me." Eva met his gaze without flinching. A short, sharp laugh escaped her lips, a sound of genuine, bitter amusement that seemed utterly out of place on the silent, solemn bridge. The laugh caught Thorian and his officers completely off guard. It was not the sound of a broken creature. "Oh, you really don't get us at all, do you, Admiral?" she said, her voice clear and steady, laced with an accent he couldn't place but which carried an undeniable weight of authority. "I understand that your formal military forces have been decimated," Thorian countered, his tone hardening. "I understand that your governments are in disarray. I understand that your technology is laughably primitive compared to our own. Yet you resist. This defies all strategic logic." Eva's eyes, a brilliant, piercing blue, seemed to burn with an intensity that made even the battle-hardened Grand Admiral uncomfortable. "Your understanding is flawed, Admiral. You've made the classic conqueror's mistake. You saw what was on the surface and assumed it was the whole truth. You thought destroying our bases meant destroying our military. You thought taking out our politicians in Washington meant destroying our leadership. We eliminated your command structure and the vast majority of your hardware capabilities," Thorian insisted, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "You destroyed buildings," Eva corrected, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "And you destroyed equipment. Parade pieces, mostly. Big, shiny toys we put on display for our own people and for any curious eyes watching from above. Our real defense strategy doesn't rely on a centralized command. It doesn't need conventional hardware. It just needs us." Thorian's exoskeleton stiffened slightly. This was not the response of a defeated primitive. This was something else. "Explain." And for the first time since the invasion began, Grand Admiral Thorian felt a truly unfamiliar sensation creep up his spine. It was a cold, prickling feeling that his species' biology equated with uncertainty. A feeling he despised. Eva's smirk faded, replaced by a look of grim purpose. Humanity has been getting ready for someone like you for a very, very long time. Not officially. Not openly. There were no congressional committees, no public announcements. But we knew, on some deep, primal level, that one day we might face an enemy that was technologically superior. An enemy that could wipe out our armies with the push of a button. So, we developed a different kind of defense. A defense that was distributed, adaptable, resilient. And impossible to decapitate with a single, clean strike. Lies, Thorian dismissed her, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Our intelligence thoroughly analyzed human military capabilities for 50 of your years. We catalogued every ship, every tank, every jet, every missile silo. Your intelligence saw exactly what we wanted the galaxy to see, Eva replied, her voice dropping slightly, drawing him in. A squabbling, divided species, consumed by petty rivalries and internal conflicts. Barely able to get along, let alone fight a real, unified war. The tanks, the jets, the aircraft carriers. They're almost theatrical at this point. Impressive, but ultimately a distraction. Our real defense is the tactical swarm. The words hung in the air for a moment. Before Thorian could demand she explain the nonsensical term, the bridge was plunged into chaos. Red alert klaxons blared, their piercing shriek shattering the tense silence. The ambient lighting shifted to a pulsating, crimson glow. His tactical officer, a being whose species was known for its unflappable calm, cried out, his voice laced with undisguised panic. Grand Admiral. We're detecting thousands. No, millions. Millions of small, unidentified objects rising from the planet's surface. They're launching from the ruined cities, the countryside, the oceans. From everywhere at once. On the main view screen, the image of the burning Earth shifted. Thorian watched, his 4 eyes wide in disbelief, as what looked like a shimmering, metallic hurricane ascended from the atmosphere. It wasn't a fleet of ships, it was a living cloud, a roiling mass of countless tiny objects moving with a perfect, terrifying coordination that looked like a living entity. It rose to meet his fleet with the silent, inexorable purpose of a tsunami. Eva's voice, now eerily calm amidst the rising panic on the bridge, cut through the noise. The tactical swarm, she said, as if she were a lecturer explaining a diagram. Hundreds of millions of network drones. Individually, they're nothing. A kid's toy. A commercial delivery bot. A farmer's field surveyor. But collectively, they form a distributed weapons system more advanced than anything your hegemony has ever dreamed of. They've been hidden in plain sight for decades, disguised as civilian technology. Manufactured in garages and basements, controlled by a mesh network that can't be destroyed by taking out any single node because it has no center. No single point of failure. As they watched, frozen in a state of horrified fascination, the swarm engaged the hegemony's orbital defense platforms. The tiny drones, each carrying a minuscule but potent explosive charge, sacrificed themselves by the thousands. But their sheer, overwhelming numbers were a weapon in themselves. They were a tide of steel and fire, washing over the alien defenses. Plasma turrets that could track and destroy a fighter jet were overwhelmed, unable to target millions of tiny, erratic bogies at once. Shields flickered and died under the relentless, attritional assault. One by one, the massive orbital platforms, the gatekeepers of Thorian's conquest, began to fall, erupting in silent, fiery blossoms against the black of space. The bridge crew was frantic, their movements chaotic, their voices a torrent of panicked reports. Thorian could only stare at the view screen, his strategic mind struggling to process the impossible sight before him. It was a weapon he couldn't fight, a strategy he couldn't comprehend. Eva's voice continued, a calm, steady anchor in the storm of his collapsing reality. This is merely the first wave, she stated. While you were busy bombing our cities and congratulating yourselves on your victory, we were adapting. We were analyzing your technology, your tactics, your shield frequencies, your communications. Finding weaknesses. Humanity doesn't fight like your previous conquests, Admiral. We don't surrender when our capitals fall. We don't need a centralized military to resist. When our survival is threatened, every single human becomes a soldier. Every factory becomes a barracks. Every garage becomes an armory. For the first time in his long and distinguished military career, Grand Admiral Thorian felt something dangerously close to fear. The tactical swarm did not fight like a conventional fleet. It moved like a force of nature. It demolished 30 hegemony battlecruisers before their crews could even reroute power to their damaged shields. The tiny drones, each no bigger than a football, targeted critical systems with an uncanny, preternatural precision. They swarmed over engine nacelles, detonating in sequence to peel back armor plating. They flew directly into weapon emplacements, sacrificing themselves to silence the plasma cannons. They clung to sensor arrays, blinding the massive warships before swarms of their brethren delivered the killing blows. Impossible, Thorian whispered, the word barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and panicked shouts on his bridge. The level of coordination required. The processing power. Distributed artificial intelligence, Eva explained, her voice cutting through his daze. Developed in secret for decades, piggybacking on the processing power of our civilian internet. It learns. It adapts in real time. There is no central control for you to target, Admiral. No single point of failure. It is the perfect defense against an advanced, top-heavy aggressor like you. A death by a million cuts. Thorian's mind raced, desperately trying to reframe his strategic reality. This changed everything. The entire hegemony conquest strategy was predicated on swift, overwhelming technological superiority against primitive species. But if the humans had been concealing this level of capability, if this was their real military? Eva seemed to read his thoughts. A strange, almost pitying look crossed her face. You should know, she added, her voice dropping again, forcing him to focus on her despite the chaos erupting around his fleet. What you're seeing. This swarm. It isn't our military response. Not really. Thorian stared at her, his 4 eyes wide with a disbelief that bordered on madness. What? What do you mean? He demanded, his mandibles clicking in agitation. I mean exactly what I said, Eva replied, her voice hardening once more. The swarm, the mesh network, the resistance fighters on the ground using their hunting rifles and homemade bombs. That's just our civilian contingency plan. It's the, in case of alien invasion, break glass protocol for the general population. Our actual military hasn't even mobilized yet. Before the full weight of that statement could crush Thorian's psyche, the entire flagship shuddered violently, a deep, groaning tremor that threw several of his officers from their feet. Red emergency lighting strobed, casting long, dancing shadows across the bridge. Sir, the tactical officer screamed, his voice cracking with terror. Multiple hull breaches detected in sectors 7 through 12. We're being boarded. Boarding pods. They didn't show up on any sensors. As if on cue, a soft, electronic click echoed in the tense silence. Eva's energy restraints flickered and died, falling to the deck with a metallic clang. She rolled her shoulders, working out the stiffness, and stood unbound before the increasingly panicked hegemony commander. I let myself be captured, Admiral, she said, her voice now carrying the cold, hard weight of command. My capture was the trigger. It confirmed your command was on this ship and gave our real forces a clean shot location. The massive doors to the command center hissed open. But instead of hegemony security forces, 2 squads of human soldiers stormed in. They moved with a fluid, lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. They were clad in sleek, black, form-fitting combat armor that seemed to drink the light. It was nothing like the bulky, primitive gear his intelligence had catalogued. This was something else entirely. Their suits were silent, yet hummed with a contained energy. Integrated weapon systems, more advanced and compact than anything in the hegemony's own arsenal, were built directly into the gauntlets. Their helmets were smooth, opaque visors, hiding any trace of humanity but displaying tactical data that flickered across their surfaces. They secured the bridge in under 10 seconds, their movements perfectly synchronized, a ballet of deadly efficiency. Thorian stared at them, then back at Eva. He tried to muster some semblance of his former dignity, his authority. "Your boarding action is impressive. But futile," he declared, his voice a hollow echo of its former power. "The hegemony will send reinforcements. They will avenge this humiliation." Eva simply signaled to one of her soldiers. The soldier tapped a command on his gauntlet, and a massive, detailed holographic display bloomed in the center of the room, replacing Thorian's own tactical map. It showed the entire human solar system. And surrounding it, positioned at strategic Lagrange points, was a network of massive, previously invisible structures. "These," Eva explained, her voice as cold and vast as the space shown in the hologram, "are our hyperspace inhibitors. The Centric Network. They activated the very moment your fleet dropped out of hyperspace and entered our system. They've been cloaked for almost a century, waiting. No transmission has left this solar system since you arrived. No distress calls. No status reports. As far as your hegemony is concerned, the conquest of the primitive humans is proceeding according to plan, right on schedule." The finality of her words was a physical blow. Thorian sank into his command chair, his massive exoskeleton suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, a cage of his own making. He wasn't just in a battle he was losing. He was in a trap. A carefully constructed, perfectly executed trap, sprung across an entire solar system. And he had flown his entire invasion force right into its jaws. The Grand Admiral, the conqueror of 17 species, the celebrated leader of the hegemony's expansionary force, looked small in his own command chair. The arrogant fire in his 4 eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow confusion. He looked at the advanced soldier securing his bridge, at the calm, resolute woman standing before him, and then at the holographic map displaying the cage that had been built around him. "Who are you people?" he finally whispered, the question not a demand, but a plea for understanding. "Our intelligence, it was thorough. We studied you for decades. We saw a fractious, primitive species, barely united, squabbling over patches of dirt and worshipping different sky gods. It was all there. Your broadcasts, your networks. It was a history of chaos." A sad, knowing smile touched Eva's lips. It was not a smile of triumph, but of something closer to understanding, even a hint of regret. "That's exactly who we wanted you to think we were, Admiral. The truth is, Earth has been functionally unified for over 200 years. The nation-states, the political squabbling on our 24-hour news cycles, the corporate rivalries, the public-facing wars over resources, it's all been a show. The greatest, most complex piece of theater in human history, staged for a galactic audience we knew was watching, even if you didn't know we knew." Thorian's mind reeled. The sheer scale of such a deception was incomprehensible. To maintain such a facade across generations, involving billions of individuals, it defied every sociological pattern the hegemony had ever recorded. "But why," he asked, the word hoarse. "Why the deception? Advanced species announce themselves to the galaxy. They seek trade, alliances, recognition. It is the natural order of things. History taught us caution," Eva replied, her voice taking on the tone of a historian. 200 years ago, our first deep space radio telescopes, far more sensitive than we ever publicly admitted, picked up a faint, desperate signal from the direction of the constellation Cygnus. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a tight beam transmission, a final data dump from a dying world. It was from a species called the Antonians. Thorian flinched. The eradication of the Antonians was a celebrated chapter in hegemony military academies, a textbook example of neutralizing a potential future threat before it could mature. Eva saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes and pressed on. The Antonians were brilliant. Artists, scientists, philosophers. They had just achieved interstellar travel. And they were proud. They announced their achievements to the stars, broadcasting their art, their music, their scientific breakthroughs, hoping to find friends. Instead, they found your hegemony. You judged them as a potential threat because their rate of technological growth was impressive. You didn't hail them, you didn't warn them. You simply arrived and wiped them from existence. But their last, desperate message, we got it. It was a warning. A warning about you. She let that sink in. We made a choice that day. A species-wide decision, ratified in secret by a unified global council that has governed from the shadows ever since. Earth would go dark. We would play the part of the divided, primitive apes you saw in our public broadcasts. We would continue to fight, amongst ourselves, to pollute our own planet, to struggle with primitive technology, all while building our real capabilities in secret. The moon cannon that just disabled your fleet. Built inside a hollowed-out crater and concealed for 80 years. Our main subterranean manufacturing complexes are hidden beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Our primary orbital shipyards are tucked away in the asteroid belt and behind Jupiter, all concealed by stealth and cloaking technology specifically designed to fool the kind of scans we intercepted from your own long-range probes. One of Eva's soldiers approached, handing her a data tablet. She studied it briefly. Our forces have secured your entire fleet. Your crews are being transferred to holding facilities. Casualties were minimal. We disabled rather than destroyed wherever possible. We are not butchers, Admiral. And now? Thorian asked, surprised by the mercy shown. What happens now? Now, Eva said, looking up from the tablet, we send you home. You, and you alone. With a message for the rest of the hegemony. Outside the main viewport of the indomitable will, the true military of Earth revealed itself. And it was a sight that broke what was left of Grand Admiral Thorian's spirit. It was a revelation of such staggering scale that it would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. From the crushing, abyssal depths of the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific, massive shapes began to rise. They were not ships, they were mobile continents of war. Carriers, miles long, surfaced like ancient leviathans, shedding trillions of gallons of water from their dark, armored hulls. In the skies over the plains of Texas and the steppes of Asia, vast fleets of stealth destroyers decloaked, their forms shimmering into existence as if the stars themselves were tearing open. They hung in the air in perfect, silent formations, their very presence a violation of physics as Thorian understood it. And from the dark side of Mars, where hegemony sensors had shown nothing but rock and red dust, an entire reserve armada of warships appeared, their engines glowing with the calm, terrifying blue-white light of contained singularities. It was a force that didn't just outnumber his own, it dwarfed it, technologically and strategically. Thorian whispered in awe and absolute terror, all this time you were testing us. Observing our tactics, our technology. Eva nodded, her expression grim. The tactical swarm was just the first layer. A civilian defense system designed to buy time, but more importantly, to act as a diagnostic tool. It was a test. A way for us to gauge your capabilities, your strategies, your shield harmonics, your chain of commands response time, all without revealing the full extent of our own hand. You failed the test, Admiral. The realization crushed whatever remained of Thorian's military pride. The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had studied them, dissected them, like a scientist observing a specimen in a controlled experiment. What message am I to deliver to the hegemony? He asked, his voice hollow. A simple one, Eva replied. Her soldier brought up another holographic display. It showed a live feed of a massive hegemony military installation on a distant moon, one of their most secure and vital forward operating bases in this quadrant of the galaxy. Tell your leaders that Earth is not a target. Not because we are primitive or weak, but because we are far more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. As they watched, the installation on the distant moon silently disappeared. There was no explosion, no sound, just a brief, impossibly bright flash of light. In its place was a perfectly hemispherical crater, its edges glowing with residual heat, as smooth as polished glass. That was a single shot from one of our long-range kinetic weapon platforms, positioned in the Oort cloud, Eva explained calmly. The projectile was the size of a school bus, traveling at 99% the speed of light. We've had your 23 most important military assets targeted for the last 50 years. Consider that one a warning shot. Tell them we could have annihilated your entire fleet here today, but chose not to. Tell them that Earth seeks neither conquest nor conflict, but we will not tolerate aggression. As Thorian was escorted to his personal vessel, the only ship the humans were permitting to return to hegemony space, he looked back at the blue and white planet that had so thoroughly shattered his reality. He had one last question. He turned to Eva, who had accompanied him to the departure bay. Your actual military, the one you claim we haven't truly seen. The forces that fired that weapon. How powerful is it? Eva's expression remained measured, but there was something in her eyes, a depth of cold, ancient power that Thorian would remember for the rest of his days. Let's put it in terms you'll understand, Admiral, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper. What you fought here, our resistance, our sworn. That was our National Guard. A civilian militia. She leaned in slightly, and her final words were like shards of ice. You haven't even met the army yet. Pray to whatever gods you have that you never have to. As his ship broke free and accelerated toward hegemony space, Thorian watched the human vessels part to create a corridor for his departure. The precision of their movement, the silent, disciplined power of their formation, spoke of a military culture far more advanced than anyone in the hegemony had ever suspected. The humans could have destroyed them completely. Instead, they had chosen restraint. Not as a weakness, but as the ultimate demonstration of strength. Thorian set his course, his mind already composing the report that would send shockwaves through the Empire's highest echelons. One phrase kept repeating in his thoughts, a simple, casual statement from the human commander that had changed the galaxy forever: you haven't even seen the army yet. The story of the hegemony's invasion isn't just a tale about spaceships and aliens, it's a profound lesson about the nature of strength. Out here, especially in a place like Texas, we're taught that true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's not about flashing what you've got. It's about quiet resolve. It's about playing the long game, knowing your own capabilities so deeply that you don't need to prove them to anyone until the moment of truth arrives. Humanity in this story played possum on a cosmic scale. They let the galaxy think they were divided, weak, and scared. They endured the insults, the assumptions, the dismissal. But all the while, they were building, preparing, and unifying in the shadows. The ultimate power move isn't showing your enemy your sword. It's letting them walk into your house, supremely confident, only for them to realize that the entire foundation is the blade, and they've been standing on the edge the whole time. True strength is the threat you never have to make. This story presents a humanity that made a collective, centuries-long choice to live a lie for the sake of survival. So here's the question for you all to chew on: was humanity right? Is a deception on that scale, involving generations who lived and died within that lie, morally justifiable, even if it was to save us all? Think about the cost to our culture, our art, our very identity. At what point does a necessary survival strategy become a prison of our own making? I want to know what you think. Drop your theories, your arguments, and your gut feelings in the comments below. And if this story made you think, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this with someone who appreciates a good cosmic long game.